Happy indeed to welcome Dean Valerie Morris to the Unitarian Church's Spring Forum series. Valerie was the Dean of the School of the Arts at the College of Charleston for more than 20 years, starting in 1998. And I had the pleasure of working with her on a number of occasions. And I also had the pleasure of teaching her son, Alexander, in freshman English, which was a treat because he was a little bit more worldly, let us say, than some of his classmates. Valerie was amazingly busy as the Dean of the School of the Arts, as you can imagine, in an arts-centric city like Charleston. The School of the Arts hosts well over 200 events every single year, and Valerie made it a point to attend a considerable number of those events. Prior to coming to the College of Charleston, she'd been chair of the Department of Performing Arts at American University in Washington, D.C. She has an MA from the University of Michigan and a BA from American before that. She served on a huge number of boards covering ballet, theater, music, arts education, both locally in Charleston, regionally in South Carolina and the Southeast, nationally and internationally even. So she's got a tremendous amount of experience across the board in the arts. And today she's going to be talking about the impact that COVID has had on the arts in Charleston. So Valerie, thank you very much for being here. And I'll pass things over to you. And you are unmuted, so.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Simon. After that introduction, you would think I would know what's going on with the arts in Charleston, but I think what this presentation will show is that we don't really know, and things are changing very radically, as they are in the rest of the world. I mean, what's happening with restaurants? What's happening with higher education? It's similar. We just don't know. But I have some bad news. I have some good news. You'll remember at the beginning of the pandemic, about a year ago, that when we thought we were going to be out for a couple of weeks, you'll remember that when they said, oh, we're going to take a couple of weeks and there's this flu going around and then we'll all come back. Once it became obvious that we were not coming back anytime soon, arts organizations were really in a state of panic. They had no idea how they were going to survive, especially choral and dance groups, because the word on choral music was really terrible. That there were choral groups, at least one big one, where the flu was rampant after they practiced. So there was a lot of panic. Visual artists and arts organizations, they saw no way they could do what they were doing online. Of course, we've just had that $69 million sale of an online art. Maura Hogan saying today, questioning whether it's really art, but we've changed a lot in just a year. Now, most organizations have figured it out. They figured out how to use Zoom, figured out how to work online. They're creating more or less effectively, but most of them, including me, hate it. I mean, I would much rather be in person with all of you, see you all there, than on this stupid Zoom. And I think most artists who are used to performing live or working live would agree with me. Two facts that kind of corroborate that. People who have devoted their lives to film, television, or audiovisual presentations are going to be more adept at it and like it more. So the fact is that no matter how good we get at when we performed live previously, and now we're trying to perform online, probably we will never, or in a long time, certainly not in a year, be as good as people who have devoted their whole life to it. So you can watch TV and see much higher level performances and productions than we can provide. And when audiences are accessing events only online, they have exposure to the world's best presentations. I remember actually a former dean at the College of Charleston telling me, how can we get people to come? He was talking about live presentations. How can you get people to leave their dinner and their bottle of wine and come and see something live when they can have access to Royal Shakespeare Company, for example, the Old Vic, Alvin Ailey Company, American Ballet, Metropolitan Opera, New York Philharmonic, Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Louvre. Why should they tune in to local online events? I think that's something that we've been questioning all year long. And the only answer we really can come up with is loyalty, that people feel loyal to us and they're going to keep tuning into us. So what does the future look like? The answer is that no one knows. 3 weeks ago, I guess it was about 3 weeks ago, when Simon asked me to present this topic. And frankly, if I'd presented it at that moment 3 weeks ago, I would have told you something completely different than what I'm telling you today. And probably if you ask me again in 3 weeks, I'll tell you something completely different from what I'm telling you, because we do not know. My guess, and that's what I'm going to be giving you for the rest of the presentation, the big organizations, Spoleto, the Gibbs, Charleston Symphony, Charleston Stage, will survive, although perhaps in a diminished configuration. And successful survival is somewhat contingent on access to federal, state, and local relief funds. Well, we keep hearing all these billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that are available in relief funds. So we're talking infusions of $1 million or more for some of these organizations. But the applications are complicated and the requirements are confusing. And so many of these organizations don't have any idea how much money they'll get or how they're going to apply for them. And middle and small sized organizations are completely at sea. Completely. And something that changed my mind about where things were going, you might have seen the notice from the Charleston Symphony, which really surprised me. They publicized a $1 million shortfall and a reversion back to an earlier, less expensive financial model, which rids it of the resident conductor. And what they don't say, it also implies reductions in the number of musicians and perhaps in their salaries. I wasn't expecting that. I thought they were doing pretty well and that's what they would announce. No, they're going back to about a position they were in 8, 9, 10 years ago. And who knows what Spoleto will do. They have not yet announced their season. I think they're announcing it this week. Rumor has it that they're going to be doing live and online performances, but that the live performances will mainly be outdoors. And if you've been to Spoleto anytime in the past, you know that during the summer, anytime there's something live outdoors, the chances of a storm, usually the storm would drive it indoors. So I don't know what they're going to do with weather. Weather didn't change because of the pandemic. And Spoleto, those of you who've been working with Spoleto, and I know some of you in the room have worked with Spoleto in the past, know that every year they kind of hold their breath, and that at the end of the year they have a board meeting. It's kind of a funny factoid. They have a board meeting, and at the board meeting they talk about what their deficit might be, and they go around the room and make people around the room pledge money until they've covered that deficit, and then they announce with great pride that they had no deficit, that they broke even for the year. I remember Ted Stern telling me that story once about the people pledging, people like Anita Zucker and those people pledging $100,000-$200,000 until they came up to it. So God knows what kind of a deficit they're going to have with no performances. Now, the small organizations will really, really struggle, and some of them we'll never see again. Village Theater, it lost its venue. Pure Theater, the Taylor Festival Choir, they'll take years to recover and perhaps never will recover. And for the most part, a number of these, I know Taylor Festival Choir, for example, aren't eligible for any of the relief funds because most of the relief funds require full-time employees and they have only part-time employees. So the large organizations will survive, the middle organizations will struggle, and some of the little organizations won't make it at all. artists, and that's kind of the focus of what my presentation is, the artists are particularly struggling, and they will continue to struggle. As you know, artists struggle, except when they're at the top of their fields, the Jasper Johns and the, Martha Graham, Alvin Ailey, those people, well, I take back Martha Graham and Alvin Ailey, they did struggle, but I don't think Jasper Johns had much struggle. But so the artists that make it don't struggle so much, but the artists that we know, all of them are struggling. They have a hard time making it from day to day. So give just an example. The Charleston Symphony losing its resident conductor, most likely hiring fewer musicians and possibly paying them less. As you know, the Charleston Symphony several years ago broke off from the union so that they wouldn't have to deal with union requirements for things like retirement and health benefits. And now because they're not unionized, they can probably pay them less salary too. They also brought in, those of you who go to the symphony know that they bring in a lot of musicians from various areas of the country to play along with them. They probably will do that a lot less. The other thing that's happened with musicians that you might not think about, very few musicians make a living salary from being a musician. One of the ways they've supplemented their income is through private teaching, which hasn't incurred in person for over a year. So they lost that whole supplement to their income. Most of the Charleston Symphony full-time musicians make less than $30,000 a year. So they need to supplement that income, and it just hasn't happened. So I imagine they're struggling. They have to pay. Now, no one has said now, oh, you're having a hard time, you don't have to pay your mortgage, or your groceries will be cheaper, or any aspect of your life will be cheaper. Now, you're going to hear a lot of things from Charleston Stage, and I'm on the board of Charleston Stage, and they've done a wonderful job with this pandemic. They've done a wonderful job. But let me tell you a little story. Several years ago, I believe it was the Alvin Ailey Company was struggling, and they brought in an advisor to write up what they could do to help their survival. And it came in with the report, and the guys were very serious about the report, very seriously told them that the way they could make it through the coming years was just to get rid of all the dancers, that if you only had the administration, they could actually break even. I think the Charleston Stage story is a little bit similar to that they have ended the year in the black. Actually, donations kept up, things like that. The only thing they didn't do was any performances. They laid off almost all the members of their staff, 19 members of their staff, all the actors, most of the technicians, they laid them off. And they cut the salaries by 15% of the rest of their employees, the people who stayed there. Sure, they ended up in the black, but what about those artists that have spent a year with no salaries, or having to work in McDonald's or do things like that? So the artists suffer, and the arts organization comes through and says, hey, we're ending up in really good shape. The Charleston Stage is about to announce they're bringing in, they're starting, and it's really great. They're starting they're bringing in 9 members of their professional company. They're going to be starting with a full season next year. I know Laura's just put in about Pure Theater. It's done very well, but how are they making any money? I mean, how are they getting by? That's the thing. As I said, most artists are already living on the edge, living day to day. And after a year of unemployment in their field, how do they recover? I happen to know, I know the Pure Theater people very well, and they struggled. They've struggled. They're so committed to theater that they've lived with struggle for a number of years. They're wonderful people, and I don't know how they're doing this year because they've had trouble in the past. So what has happened? What will happen? Many many artists, and we're not sure who, because we haven't come back together, have left the field or left the area. That's going to be sad. Some of our better artists are changing their lives. And as I mentioned, organizations will hire fewer artists and pay them even less. What happens to the artists they no longer hire? And how can the artists that are being paid less survive on less? So that's going to be a problem. So basically, most organizations, particularly the larger ones, will survive, but it may be to the detriment of many artists who will find it almost impossible to recover. You know, jazz musicians, for example, mainly play in restaurants late at night. And if the restaurant is closed, and so is their gig. So it could take years to recover, is I guess the bottom line here. For artists, like dancers, and I don't know if you've thought of this, but a lot of actors, for example, get by when they're very young by playing leading men or ingenue roles or things like that. You have a very limited time to do that. Dancers have a limited time to be dancers, like athletes. I mean, you know, you only have a certain number of years, and for them, the time lost may well be unrecoverable. They might not be able to make it back ever because their time is gone. Ballet dancers, I mean, just think about them. I mean, when they're in their early 20s, they're at the mid, almost the end point of their career. Very few of them make it past age 30. So it's very serious for them. So basically, what will happen, the arts will survive, but at least for the short term in a diminished state, and artists will require an even longer recovery period. Relief plans, they're all in the air. There's something called shuttered venues. I don't know if you've heard about that. That's one of the biggest influxes of money directly to arts organizations. But people do not know yet, what does a shuttered venue mean? Is that only the venue? Or is that the company that resides in the venue? For example, will Dock Street be able to get millions of dollars in shuttered venue money while Charleston stage gets nothing? Will the Gilliard get the money and the Charleston Symphony nothing? We do not know. There are other government programs that are supposed to provide substantial financial aid to organizations, and it's been very hard to figure out if you're eligible or not. Those organizations that can hire or have on their board lawyers, highly paid lawyers, will be able to figure it out. The smaller companies will not be able to figure it out whether they're eligible or not. I was mentioning I'm also on the Taylor Festival Choir board. They're eligible as far as they can tell for absolutely nothing, because Rob brings in the singers from all over the country, flies them in, he pays their airfare, he pays them on a per performance contract. He doesn't have any real employees, so he's eligible for nothing. So it's of concern. So just to end where I began, the future is uncertain and we don't know. If all this money, this relief money comes in and millions of dollars, then maybe things will change. But then I have to wonder, why did the Charleston Symphony already announce that it's cutting back if it knew it might get all this infusion of millions of dollars? So I wonder if they know more than I do about what might be coming up. So basically that's the case, and in another month we'll maybe know more, or maybe it'll be even more confusing. It's kind of say, like with Simon, it's kind of like higher education. I mean, we just don't know, and we're kind of guessing, and we're going to be back to normal in the fall, and all the students will return, and everything will be great. So anyway, that's my presentation. I'd be happy to have you ask me any questions.
Thank you, Valerie. That was fairly bleak, I have to say. it seems to be the one certainty in your presentation was that
Yes.
things are tough and will continue to be tough. So folks, you can ask questions directly, or you can put things in the chat and I will ask them. So I might just ask Valerie, I mean, are we worse off in South Carolina than elsewhere in the country? Are there states where there are more enlightened legislatures that are actually have state arts commissions that are coming up?
No, I would say not, because actually, surprising as it may be, South Carolina is one of the leaders in the arts industry. Unlike almost anything else, that we're really at the top, and we have some of the best commission. The South Carolina Arts Commission is very, very good. Arts education in the state, even though education in the state isn't so hot, arts education is very, very good. So I would be surprised. I think there are probably many states that are in even worse state. I think Pennsylvania, for one thing, is having a really rough time, and maybe West Virginia worse than us. Massachusetts, surprisingly, yeah. So no, I think South Carolina probably will be one of the leaders in comebacks.
And I know
See, I did say something positive, Simon. I did.
Well, sort of, relatively. And I know the NEA has always been sort of been cut back and is pathetically resourced, really. Any assistance from them?
Yes, that's where the Shuttered Venues is coming from. But where they're at is that this president has been very positive. In fact, saying he wanted a cabinet position for like an art czar. When I was at American University, which is a long time ago, that was one of the hot areas of conversation always, that we should have a cabinet position. And so when something's gone on for 35, 40 years of discussion, I don't hold out high hope that that will happen. The arts and the Americans for the Arts, which is the big advocacy group that supports arts advocacy, unfortunately had some problems, as are a lot of places, with people who were former employees complaining about the atmosphere there, and being very vocal about it. It was unfortunate timing, because this is when President Biden wanted to make his big announcements about a big infusion into the arts. And while he won't make an announcement that there will be no infusion into the arts, it's an uncomfortable time for him to come forward and say he's gonna subsidize more and more art at the same time when these accusations are hanging over. So that was very unfriendly, unfortunate timing for that. So I don't see any immediate relief from the National Endowment for the Arts, except through this Shuttered Venues money, which no one knows the definition of shuttered venues.
Thanks. So we got a couple of questions, one from Claire Law and then from Frank Hardy. So Claire, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, and then Frank.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Dr. Valerie, you said that these small companies that employ part-time employees are really struggling. Were you somehow implying that if they were employing full-time employees, that maybe the federal stimulus money would then apply? I haven't read the, 56,000
That's exactly.
pages. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. And I'm not sure if it's all the relief money, because I'm not sure. But I know that the money that's been available in South Carolina so far was only available to organizations that had full-time employees. So those that did not were not eligible. The other thing which I mentioned is the access to legal advice. That some of the big companies have access to major corporate lawyers, and these little companies are struggling to try to figure out if they're eligible or not.
Well, right. The CARES Act is 5,600 pages. I'm looking at it because it has 165 pages on changes to the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So I've read that, and it is quite difficult to make out what exactly they're saying.
Yeah.
And so if they have lawyers who can plow through the 5,000 pages, I'm sure they can find
Yeah.
some loopholes and get some money.
Right. If you know Rob Taylor, I mean, it's unimaginable that he would plow through 5,000 pages. He would plow through 5,000 pages of music in an instant,
Yeah.
but that he's going to go through legal
Yeah.
documents. I don't know. It's of concern, and even worse is if these organizations hire someone or work with someone to put in an application and then they get turned down. I know in South Carolina they had a lot of money. They had, I want to say $40 million or something. They ended up like turning down a third of the applicants. And you know, to spend all that time writing an application and then get turned down, because you know that was probably the smaller organizations that got turned down.
Yeah, it's discouraging.
Yes.
Go to Frank Hardy for the next question, please.
Yeah, I wrote it in there, but I'll say it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. I'm always looking for opportunities for our fine church, and I wonder. I know we're continuing to employ artists of different types. We might even call a minister when we get one an artist. But I wonder if we have an opportunity, and other churches have an opportunity, to step in and do a lot more in the entertainment field using some of these great artists we have in this area, because you know, our church would benefit greatly just to have everybody in this area more aware of us. And now that we don't, you know, we're frequently limited by the size of our you know, coffee house venue and the size of our sanctuary. And now electronically, we're not limited. So I don't know how much money we could probably break even for sure. We make money on Coffee House, or we made money on Coffee House. And we have people, I think, who are pretty good with new media. Does anybody else think that we could turn this in, you know, from something sour to something sweet?
I think churches are one of our things that we can look at in terms of traditionally how they've worked with the arts, and colleges. I think that colleges can come in and help subsidize the arts. I don't know about churches, but I know colleges are having their own struggles. And so, you know, I know that if Simon came to our college and said, we want to infuse more money into the arts, I suspect what the answer would be. But churches might, they have the venues, and that's what's really, you know, those are really needed, the venues, just opening it up for people to be able to perform. But then you get to churches sometimes dictate content, and that's bad. And sometimes they dictate, like I keep on picking on Rob Taylor, but I know he performs extensively at churches and does a really good job. But sometimes he uses candles. And so he's been banned from some churches because there was candle wax on the floor. So, you know, it's not all wonderful.
Thanks, Valerie. Libby has the next question, and then we'll go to Stephanie, and then to Richard, and then to Bill. So Libby, you're up next. You need to unmute.
When the symphony was going under, I was on the board, and the community foundation here, there are lots of people, including myself, who have set up funds to donate to local charities because we care about our community. The community foundation, lots of people contact them for help, but they do not contact the people like me to say, here are some needy sources that you might be interested in donating to. And trying to get them to do that this time might be a useful thing. I know they didn't do it when the symphony, of all things, was going under.
Yeah.
They did not contact
in a way
people to say they need your help.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think in a way they've moved on from the arts, don't you think?
Oh yeah, they have
community service and
yeah,
that kind of stuff.
But that's not fair to those of us who have money there, because it's an easy way to be able to give.
Yeah.
we would all value. In 20 years, they have referred one good opportunity to me.
Mhm.
I would be open to others. And so just going at this as a whole thing, if
Yeah.
somebody could come up with, these are the opportunities, and get them to send that out to the people with funds, those are people that could respond.
Yeah.
Um,
And
And you, Valerie, are
agree
the
with
kind of
you.
person that might be able to do this.
but I agree with you that also that each one of the organizations is doing their own fundraising, and
Yeah.
that becomes very annoying. I know it becomes
Yeah.
annoying because there's only a certain amount of donors. We all know who they are, and then you get inundated with people asking you for money, and I don't blame any organization or any individual donor who sits back and says, well, if I give to this one, then I'm going to make that one angry. So I'm not going to give to any of them. I'm just not going to give. And that's, I fear that happening because they're all coming on with their development officers to say, feed me, feed me.
And
Good point.
development officers are still being paid, which is the sort of ironic thing that you were bringing
Yes, 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 yes.
in your
Yeah, they're the ones that don't get laid off.
yeah.
Yes, right. Well, Simon would say that in colleges too, that the administration stays, they often don't take substantial salary reductions, and then the faculty get laid off.
And the differentials expand the whole time. Yeah. So next question is from Stephanie Maslin.
Hi. So my own background is doing a lot of community theater. I've worked with a number of nonprofits as well as done some volunteering with regional theater companies. And one message that I've just loved throughout the pandemic is like, remember when we were all in our worst spot, how like we all turned to the arts to feel okay, whether that was binge watching Netflix, which is certainly a different industry than live performance. But I was curious about how you thought that involvement with unions, especially for performers, might change given what we have or haven't seen the usefulness of that been throughout the pandemic, as well as for some of the local groups that you've talked about being left out of funding or left out of having the resources to access funding. If you have seen any movement towards like collaboration building regionally to share some resources, whether it's about funding or, you know, if the one group can afford to bring on the legal specialist, if they can share the wealth or anything like that to help share resources better.
I would hope that's going on. I have no proof that is actually happening. There have been theater alliances here in Charleston. Actually, there was one, Libby will remember, it was very active theater alliance, and it kind of fell apart because of rivalries and jealousies. I mean, they're all going after a very limited pot of money. And there's always that I'm better than you are kind of syndrome that comes in. You asked about unions. Unions are almost impossible to, because they usually represent the entire country, and they feel if they back off in any one area, then they'll have to back off everywhere else. And so it's very hard to get them to yield to that's why the symphony years ago broke away from the union, which I'm not sure if the musicians are feeling good about that right at this moment. They felt good about it for a number of years because they felt they were their own supporters.
Best representatives, yeah.
They're best representatives, but now they have nowhere to go. If the board of the symphony says we can't pay you benefits anymore, and I have no evidence that that's what they're going to do, they have no one they can turn to. So the unions have a definite place, but I think they're not good at negotiating because they always negotiate up and won't yield.
Thanks. So Richard Hayes has had to go off to the worship thing, but we did want to make sure that everybody saw his comment in the chat that the church is going to be opening up its coffee house concerts from September onwards, which we hope is a good thing. Bill, your question is up next if you want to unmute.
Great, thank you very much. And this is really instructive for some of us. I have a daughter who's a choreographer in Brooklyn who I helped convince to get her MFA so she could ply her her skills to a college, which she's done. But she's really had to spread out and is involved in some cooperative groups where funding, it's really kind of radical, but it calls to my question, you know, for people essentially to pay as they can, as they go, to keep a group of artists going. I'm wondering if you see other experiments like this going on, and is what we're going through in the pandemic with sort of traditional funding of the arts, is this going to call this into question? You know, many of us need the arts to survive. Just personally, aesthetically, we don't do well without multiple arts, whatever those arts are. It seems
I think you're right that what's going to happen. For example, Charleston Stage is about to announce a new endeavor they're calling City Stage. And I'm not sure what it involves, but it involves a core of actors going out in the community and working with the community on staging shows. It's what a number of, when I lived in Washington, Arena Stage had something called Living Stage. And I think it's probably very similar to that, those of you who might have been in the DC area. So I think there will be those things. Of course, there's a group in Charleston called Enough Pie that's up in the north area. And they're very much about collaborations, artists and community. Some of the community music groups, the education groups are tied in with the community. I think you're right. You're gonna see a lot more of that, a lot more of let's all join together and work together. More so than what I was saying before, than the arts groups working together, because they often clash. Ironically, there are, if you read the Sunday paper, there's a musical theater company trying to form, and there are two rival opera companies trying to form in this time. Musical theater and opera, two of the most expensive things to do. And those people, I think you've got to keep in mind, artists are indomitable. And in this time, these three groups are thinking that they can survive as organizations, and very similar organizations, one musical theater, two opera. If one of them survives, it will be a miracle, but I'm rooting for all of them.
I see Laura's put the Enough Pie website in there. Laura, do you want to add anything to the comments about Enough Pie?
Just that they've done wonderful things. I had a really fun thing I participated in one time. They said, we're going to do a bike video. We need people, or a movement video. And they wanted people walking and roller skating and biking and pushing strollers. And it was in a parking lot on Upper Morrison Drive. And they had a drone and they did this choreographed thing. It was so much fun. So, and I know lots of other things, like they were chalking the sidewalks to get people to slow down on crosswalks. I mean, and
it's a very interesting concept.
I think their emphasis is a little different now. They're more a racial justice emphasis on that end of town, as opposed to the what arts can do for it. They're still doing it, but
yeah,
when it was Catherine, it was a heavier emphasis there than with Satika. But yeah, they still do it. But I was there for that too. We were in costumes, funny costumes for that event, as I remember. We knitted a whole display one year, you know, that amazingly survived a lot of rainstorms. I never thought it was going to make it through the first one, but it was up for a number of months.
And the thing is, we need both. We need these community activities, but we also don't want to let go of the things that we really cherish, like going to the symphony or the opera or ballet theater, classical theater.
The thing with the symphony
keeping the balance is very difficult. Keeping the balance is going to be very difficult.
One of the things we agonized about when the symphony was going under before is the Charleston Symphony was the core of professional classical music in the whole state, because they were all over the place, and letting that get decimated had a big impact. Although a couple other cities got their own symphonies going, which was not a bad outcome at that time, actually. But yeah, if we don't support the arts here, we're affecting the whole state.
Mhm. I think North Charleston formed their pop orchestra
Yep.
off of some of the people who were let go by the Charleston Symphony.
Yeah.
No, so Sharon's got a hand raised and Claire Law. So Sharon, Tom Ivy. Tom, if you want to go ahead, and then Claire.
Hi, Valerie.
Hi there.
Question, have professional musicians in the Charleston area have had any success that you know of in giving lessons via Zoom? Has that been
Yes,
any sort of a? No?
Yes, they are giving lessons via Zoom. Whether they're having success at doing it, I don't know. I suspect they are. I would not like it. I mean, the idea that, but I was hearing, but again, you get to that. Okay, well, you get a lesson via Zoom with someone local. Well, why not get a lesson with Yo-Yo Ma if you're doing it via Zoom?
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
why get it with a local musician? Why not go to the top? Juilliard has been doing wonderful things with Zoom. Juilliard School, and very professionally done. And so you have to wonder, well, why not do that? If you're a mother, yeah.
It's the same question about MOOCs, multiple online courses. Like, why take a course from College of Charleston when you could take a course from Stanford?
Yeah, exactly. This is that exact problem. Yes.
Yeah. I will comment that the music students at the college have been very creative in finding places to practice safely, since the practice rooms have been, I guess, closed.
Yes, they're all out. They're outside under tents. Well, the good thing about that, putting people outside under tents, was that some people on the college campus that had never even known there was a music program can't walk across campus without hearing those kids, and that's a good thing.
It's lovely, actually. My office is just across the road from the Siston Yard, so I can hear these wonderful ethereal sounds drifting across the road under Rob Taylor's tutelage. Claire's question is up next. Claire, if you want to unmute. Unmute, Claire. Nope, don't know what's going on. Well, in that case, can I ask a question about arts education, Valerie, since we seem to have lost Claire? You know, you said we do quite well in South Carolina. Do you think the pandemic is actually likely to sort of damage that we might get some more sort of sense, oh, we've only got this amount of money, we can't actually afford the arts any longer?
We do get that all the time, and artists are very good at working against that. But there's also well, as you know, it's a very conservative state. And there are people who feel that it should all be about science and math. All education should be about science and math. And where studies show that arts very much enhance the education of kids, particularly kids in poverty areas. I think there are very good advocates in South Carolina for that kind of arts education. And in fact, one of the big advocates for arts education is Molly Spearman, who's the superintendent. I've been on committees with Molly, and in fact, she headed some of the committees. And she's I think she was a music. She was an arts teacher. That's her background. So I think right now we're in a very strong position in education in South Carolina.
I was always amazed that we didn't do even more based on the evidence, because all of our kids went to Ashley River Creative Arts Elementary School, which had actually had a racial quota to begin with, and had no audition requirement whatsoever in order to get in, unlike School of the Arts, middle school and high school, where you have to show some proficiency, which is, you know, skewing all sorts of things. But Ashley River always used to come near the top academically.
Yes.
Just because they had an interesting, varied curriculum. And you go, you can see it's working there. Why the heck do you not apply it across the board to all of these schools? Because it works. You see,
I think because we're the only ones listening to that argument.
But the numbers were right there.
The numbers are there. There's been, I believe it was the Lewis Harris poll, but it might have been another poll. That they've done it several years in a row and found that that students from all areas are greatly enhanced with arts education, more so than almost any other discipline. But that information is being dispersed mainly to other arts people, and you know, it's very hard to get. Well, look at. I don't know what all of your politics are, but look at some of the legislators in South Carolina and think they're never going to change. And they think of arts in very negative ways.
Mhm. Yeah. Bill brought up the question of MFAs, which can be tremendously
Yeah.
expensive. So
Yes,
out of
but if you want to teach in college, you have to have at least an MFA.
yeah. But do you think there's going to be a knock-on effect on those, because people will actually start to say, yeah, actually, this is just, you know, there are not that many jobs going in that area, and the cost of those degrees is too much?
Yeah, that will probably have some impact. But if you look, I used to work in DC with a guy who his main job was with the Department of Labor, and he was always coming up with these labor statistics. And the one segment of the population that gets educated more and more continually are artists. That artists, you know, I mean, artists always have teachers, and they're always taking lessons, and you know, and they love to go to classes, and they love higher education, and so I think the MFA is going to be still popular, because also, if you're having a trouble making a living, getting a job, that at least you're doing something if you're getting an MFA.
Right. Good. Thanks. Any other questions, folks? We got to 10:47, so we should probably be closing down. But I'll give anybody a second to ask a final question or make a final comment. Otherwise, looks like Libby is trying to speak, but is muted.
He's muted.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say that I had been talking to David Stahl shortly before the symphony was closing and before everything went so badly in his life. But he was the conductor in Munich and here. And in Munich, it was government supported. So he spent his time being a music director and planner. In Charleston, he spent his time trying to fundraise and keep the symphony going. And it was a very different experience for him. We'll never get there probably, but
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Valerie. This has been absolutely wonderful. Our presentation next week is actually sort of vaguely connected to this, because it's going to be by Professor John Cropper, who's a history professor at the College of Charleston, relatively new to the College of Charleston. He does African history, and he's going to be presenting about Omar ibn Said, who is a Muslim cleric and a literate person who actually wrote his own autobiography, which accounted for his capture and enslavement in the United States in the early 19th century. So it's an autobiography written by an enslaved person. And that story has now been taken by Rhiannon Giddens from the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And I mean, just an amazingly interesting person altogether. I'm sure Valerie could tell you all sorts of things about a wonderfully eclectic musical background. And Rhiannon Giddens has turned that into an opera, which was supposed to have been staged by Spoleto last year. We'd hoped that it would come on this year, but I believe has actually been postponed till 2022. But anyway, John Cropper will be talking about that story of Omar ibn Said, a fascinating story of this educated, literate person who was enslaved and then obviously treated like dirt here in South Carolina. So thank you again, Valerie, and thanks everybody. This has been terrific.
Valerie,
thank you all
so much more than I expected.
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you.
take care.